The night I learned that a man could weep from hope rather than sorrow, I stood in a darkened corridor holding 10,000 pounds worth of diamonds in my trembling hands. I did not know then that the Duke of Blackwood watched me from the shadows, nor that my next steps would determine the course of both our lives forever. I must begin at the beginning, though the beginning itself was an ending. My father died on a grey Tuesday in November, and with him died every comfort I had ever known. Thomas Ashford had been a merchant of modest success, a man who believed in honest work and the promise of tomorrow. But tomorrow betrayed him, as it betrays so many dreamers. His shipping venture failed when 3 vessels sank in a storm off the coast of Cornwall, and the creditors descended upon our home like wolves upon a wounded deer. I watched them carry away my mother's pianoforte, the settee where I had read my first novel, the portrait of my grandmother that had hung above the mantelpiece for as long as I could remember. They took everything, and when there was nothing left to take, they took my father's will to live. He passed quietly in his sleep, the physician said. A weak heart, he claimed, but I knew better. My father's heart had not been weak, it had been broken. My mother had preceded him to the grave by 7 years, claimed by a fever that swept through our village when I was but 15. I had no siblings, no aunts or uncles who would claim me, no cousins who remembered my name. At 22, I found myself utterly alone in a world that had no patience for orphaned daughters of ruined men. It was Mrs. Pemberton, my father's elderly housekeeper who had stayed on without wages until the very end, who told me of the position. She had a sister in service at a great house in Derbyshire, and that sister had written of a need for a governess. The Duke of Blackwood, she said, had a young daughter in want of education and companionship. The pay was generous, the accommodations comfortable, and the household, while somber, was respectable. I had no choice but to accept. Pride is a luxury that only the wealthy can afford, and I had not a penny to my name. The journey to Blackwood Manor took 3 days by public coach, and with each mile that passed, I felt my old life receding like a tide that would never return. I watched the landscape change from the gentle green hills of my childhood home to the wilder, more rugged terrain of the north. The sky grew heavier, the air colder, and by the time the coach deposited me at the village of Ashwick, a light rain had begun to fall. A cart was waiting to take me the final miles to the manor, driven by a silent man who introduced himself only as Hawkins and spoke not another word for the entire journey. I did not mind his silence. It gave me time to compose myself, to rehearse the words I would say when I met my new employer, to remind myself that I was no longer Eleanor Ashford, daughter of a respectable merchant, but merely Miss Ashford, governess, a woman who must earn her bread through service. Blackwood Manor rose from the mist like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and towering chimneys and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes in the fading afternoon light. It was beautiful in the way that storms are beautiful, in the way that cliffs are beautiful. There was a grandeur to it that demanded respect, even fear, and I felt my heart quicken as the cart passed through the iron gates and began the long approach up the gravel drive. The gates themselves were wrought iron, twisted into elaborate patterns of leaves and vines that spoke of centuries of wealth and craftsmanship. Stone lions guarded the entrance, their expressions fierce and watchful, as though daring the unworthy to proceed. Beyond them, the drive wound through grounds that must once have been magnificent, but now showed signs of neglect. The hedges were overgrown, the flower beds empty, the fountains silent. It was as though the estate itself had fallen into mourning. But the house was magnificent still. It rose 3 stories high, its facade a symphony of arched windows and ornamental stonework. Ivy climbed the eastern wall, and smoke curled from 6 chimneys, suggesting warmth within despite the cold without. As we drew closer, I could make out details that spoke of generations of history: a coat of arms above the main door, statues in niches, a weather vane in the shape of a raven perched atop the highest tower. This was to be my home. This grand, intimidating, beautiful place. I clutched my small traveling bag more tightly and tried to still the trembling of my hands. I was met at the servants' entrance by Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, a tall woman with silver hair pulled back severely from a face that might once have been handsome but had long since settled into an expression of permanent disapproval. She looked me over with eyes that missed nothing, from my travel-worn dress to the single trunk that contained all my worldly possessions. "You are younger than I expected," she said. "The last governess was a woman of 50, and she did not last a month." I asked what had become of her. Mrs. Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line. "She found the household not to her liking," she said, "and the household found her not to its liking either. Come. I will show you to your room, and then you will meet Lady Rosalind. His Grace does not wish to be disturbed this evening." My room was small but clean, tucked away in the east wing of the house where the family rarely ventured. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a writing desk positioned beneath a window that overlooked the gardens. In the distance, I could see a lake shrouded in mist, and beyond that, the dark shapes of the moors stretching toward the horizon. It was a lonely view, but I found a strange comfort in it. Loneliness was something I understood. I unpacked my few belongings, changed into a fresh dress, and followed Mrs. Whitmore through the labyrinth of corridors to the nursery where Lady Rosalind awaited. She was 7 years old, with dark hair like her father's, and eyes the color of spring leaves. She sat very still in a chair by the window, a book open in her lap, though she was not reading it. When I entered, she looked up at me with an expression that I recognized immediately. It was the expression of a child who has learned not to expect kindness, not to hope for love, not to believe that the people who come into her life will stay. My heart, already tender from the grief of the past months, cracked open at the sight of her. "You must be Miss Ashford," she said, and her voice was small but steady. "Are you going to leave too?" I crossed the room and knelt before her, bringing myself to her level. "I will stay as long as you need me," I said. "That is a promise." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for the lie. And when she did not find it, something in her eyes softened, just a little. That was the beginning of my life at Blackwood Manor. In those first weeks, I devoted myself entirely to Rosalind. I taught her letters and numbers, French and geography, history and needlework. But more than that, I taught her that she was worthy of attention, of patience, of love. I read to her every night before bed, stories of brave princesses and kind fairies and happily ever afters that she seemed to drink in like water in a desert. I took her on walks through the gardens, pointing out the names of flowers, teaching her to identify birds by their songs. I held her when she woke from nightmares, and I praised her when she mastered a difficult lesson. And slowly, like a flower turning toward the sun, Rosalind began to bloom. The servants watched us with a mixture of curiosity and approval. They had seen governesses come and go, each one defeated by the silence of the house, the coldness of the Duke, the sadness of the child. They had not expected me to last, and yet here I was, still standing, still smiling, still refusing to be broken by the weight of the sorrow that permeated these walls. Mrs. Whitmore's disapproval softened into something that might, with great generosity, be called respect. She began to save the warmest bread for my breakfast tray and ensured that a fire was always lit in my room before I retired for the evening. The kitchen maid, a cheerful girl named Betsy, took to leaving small posies of wildflowers on my windowsill. Even Hawkins, the silent driver who had brought me from the village, nodded to me when our paths crossed in the stable yard. But of the Duke, I saw almost nothing. He was a ghost in his own house, a presence felt, but never seen. I caught glimpses of him sometimes, a tall figure in black disappearing around a corner, a silhouette in a window of the west wing where I was forbidden to go. The servants spoke of him in hushed tones, as though even mentioning his name too loudly might summon him like a spirit from the shadows. They called him His Grace, never anything more familiar, and they obeyed his commands with a swiftness that spoke of fear rather than affection. Mrs. Whitmore told me, on my third night, something of his history. She did not wish to speak ill of her employer, she said, but she thought it best that I understand the nature of the household I had entered. The Duke had married young, she said, to a woman of great beauty and no virtue. Lady Blackwood, as she had been then, was the daughter of an earl, raised in luxury and accustomed to having her every whim indulged. She had married Sebastian Vance for his title and his fortune, and she had given him a daughter within the first year of their union. But motherhood did not suit her. She found the country dull, the manor oppressive, and her husband cold. She began to take lovers, first discreetly, then brazenly, flaunting her affairs before the very servants who were meant to serve her. The Duke endured it for years, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice heavy with old sorrow. He endured it for the sake of his daughter, for the sake of his name. But then she took things too far. I asked what she meant. Lady Blackwood ran away with a French count, Mrs. Whitmore said. She took with her the Blackwood diamonds, a necklace worth a fortune, a piece that had been in the family for generations. She left in the middle of the night without a word of farewell to her husband or her child. Rosalind was only 3 years old. She woke the next morning asking for her mother, and there was no mother to be found. My heart ached for the little girl I had come to love, and for the man I had not yet met. What became of Lady Blackwood? I asked. Mrs. Whitmore shook her head. No one knows for certain. There were rumors that the Count abandoned her in Paris, that she fell into poverty, that she died of a fever in some foreign hospital. Other rumors say she is still alive, living under a false name somewhere on the continent. His Grace does not speak of her, and we do not ask. And the necklace? Lost, Mrs. Whitmore said. Gone forever, along with the Duke's ability to trust. I thought of this story often in the days that followed. I thought of it when I looked at Rosalind's sad eyes, when I heard the echoes of the Duke's footsteps in distant corridors, when I felt the heaviness of the house pressing down upon me like a physical weight. This was a house wounded by betrayal, a family shattered by lies, and I was merely a stranger passing through, trying to bring what small light I could to its darkened halls. But I did not know then how closely I was being watched. It was perhaps 6 weeks into my tenure when I first felt it. That prickling sensation at the back of my neck, that awareness of eyes upon me. I was in the library with Rosalind, helping her practice her penmanship, when I looked up suddenly and thought I saw a figure in the doorway. But when I blinked, there was no one there, only the empty frame and the shadows of the corridor beyond. I told myself I was imagining things. The house was old, full of drafts and creaking floorboards and tricks of light. It was natural to feel watched in such a place. But the feeling did not go away. It followed me through my days, through lessons and meals and walks in the garden. It watched me as I read to Rosalind, as I mended the torn hem of my dress, as I wrote letters to Mrs. Pemberton that I would never send because I could not afford the postage. Someone was observing me, studying me, waiting for something. And then I understood. The servants had told me, in whispered conversations that stopped whenever Mrs. Whitmore approached, that the Duke trusted no one. They told me that he tested everyone who entered his household, searching for signs of disloyalty, of greed, of the betrayal that he had come to expect from all who surrounded him. The last governess, they said, had been dismissed after she was caught reading the Duke's private correspondence. The footman before that had been turned out for pocketing a silver candlestick. Everyone was suspect. Everyone was watched. And now I was being watched too. I resolved to give them nothing to find. I performed my duties with meticulous care. I took nothing that was not offered to me. I asked no questions about the Duke's affairs. I kept to my place and my work, never venturing into the forbidden West Wing, never speaking out of turn. I would not give them a reason to dismiss me, because dismissal would mean losing Rosalind, and I had come to love that child as though she were my own. The weeks turned into months, and winter settled over the moors like a gray blanket. Snow fell, and the world outside the manor became a landscape of white and silver and shadow. Rosalind and I spent our days by the schoolroom fire, conjugating French verbs and reading about ancient civilizations, and creating elaborate stories about the adventures of her dolls. She laughed more easily now, smiled more readily. The shadows in her eyes had begun to lift. And still, the Duke remained invisible. I asked Mrs. Whitmore once if His Grace was pleased with my work. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "If he were not pleased," she said, "you would no longer be here." It was not exactly a glowing endorsement, but I took what comfort I could from it. Then came the night of the necklace. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were when the post arrived, and I always allowed myself a small hope that there might be a letter for me, some word from the outside world that I was not entirely forgotten. There was never anything, of course, but hope is a stubborn thing, and I could not seem to extinguish it. I had put Rosalind to bed and returned to my room to prepare for sleep. The fire had burned low, and I added another log before crossing to the washstand to clean my face. It was then, as I turned toward my bed, that I saw it. There, on my dressing table, gleaming in the firelight like a coiled serpent, was a necklace of diamonds. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. I had never seen anything so beautiful in all my life. The stones caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows, and even from across the room, I could tell that they were real, impossibly real, worth more money than I would earn in 100 lifetimes. My first thought was that there had been a mistake. Some maid had misplaced a piece of jewelry, had left it in the wrong room. I should take it to Mrs. Whitmore immediately. I thought. I should explain that I had found it here, that I had no idea how it had come to be in my chamber. But even as I thought this, I knew it was not true. This was no mistake. This was a test. I approached the dressing table slowly, as though the necklace might spring to life and bite me. Up close, it was even more magnificent than it had appeared from a distance. The diamonds were set in a delicate web of gold, and at the center hung a single stone the size of a robin's egg, flawless and brilliant. I had never held so much wealth in my hands, had never even been in the same room as such wealth. My father's entire fortune at its height would not have been enough to purchase a single stone from this piece. 10,000 pounds, I thought. That was what Mrs. Whitmore had said the Blackwood diamonds were worth. 10,000 pounds. With 10,000 pounds, I could rebuild my father's business. I could buy back my family home. I could live in comfort for the rest of my life, never again having to bow and scrape before those who considered themselves my betters. I could be free. The temptation was there, I will not deny it. For a single, shameful moment, I allowed myself to imagine it. I saw myself slipping out of the house in the dead of night, the necklace hidden in my petticoats. I saw myself selling it to some discreet jeweler in London, no questions asked. I saw myself walking through the streets of my childhood town, head held high, no longer the pitiful orphan but a woman of means. But even as I imagined it, I knew I would never do it. This was not who I was. This was not who my father had raised me to be. He had taught me that honesty was its own reward, that integrity was worth more than gold, that a person's character was measured not by what they did when others were watching, but by what they did when they believed themselves to be alone. I was not alone. I could feel it now, that familiar prickle at the back of my neck, that awareness of unseen eyes. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting to see what I would do. Very well, I thought, let them watch. I picked up the necklace, cradling it carefully in my hands, and walked to the door. The corridor beyond was dark, lit only by a single candle flickering in a wall sconce at the far end. I did not know where the Duke's chambers were, but I knew the direction of the west wing, and I reasoned that his rooms must be there. I walked through the darkness without fear. I had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of, and that knowledge gave me a courage I had not known I possessed. My footsteps echoed on the marble floors, and the shadows seemed to lean in close, curious about this small woman in her plain nightgown, carrying a fortune in diamonds through the sleeping house. I found his door by instinct more than knowledge. It was larger than the others, made of dark oak carved with the blackwood coat of arms, and a thin line of light showed beneath it. He was awake then, waiting. I knocked. For a long moment there was no response. I stood in the darkness, my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird. And I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps he was asleep. Perhaps he did not wish to be disturbed. Perhaps this whole endeavor was foolish, and I should simply leave the necklace outside his door and return to my room without a word. But something held me there, something that would not let me walk away. I had come this far, and I would see it through. Then I heard footsteps, slow and measured, approaching from within. The door swung open, and I found myself face to face with the Duke of Blackwood for the first time. He was not what I had expected. I had imagined a man twisted by bitterness, aged by sorrow, made ugly by the cruelty of his heart. But the man before me was none of these things. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes the color of a winter sky. His face was angular and aristocratic, handsome in a severe way, though lines of pain were etched around his mouth and eyes. He wore a dressing gown of deep burgundy, and he looked at me with an expression I could not read. "Miss Ashford," he said, and his voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "You should be in bed." I held out the necklace. "I found this in my room," I said. "I believe it belongs to you." He did not take it. He simply stared at me, his pale eyes searching my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. But I did not look away. I held his gaze, and I held out the necklace, and I waited. "You know what it is," he said. It was not a question. "I believe it is the piece that was stolen when your wife left," I said. "The Blackwood diamonds." Mrs. Whitmore told me the story. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, or surprise. And knowing its value, he said slowly, "You bring it to me in the middle of the night." "Why?" "Because it is yours," I said, "and I am no thief." The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. I could hear the fire crackling in the room behind him, could smell the faint scent of brandy and tobacco that clung to his clothes. He was so close that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his breath came just a little too quickly. And then I saw it, a single tear sliding down his cheek. He turned away abruptly, one hand rising to cover his face, but not before I saw the raw emotion that had broken through his carefully constructed mask. He wept. This cold, proud, untouchable Duke, this man who had built walls around his heart so high that no one could scale them. This man wept before me like a child. I did not know what to do. I had expected anger, suspicion, perhaps even dismissal. I had not expected this. "Your Grace," I said softly. "I did not mean to distress you." He shook his head, still turned away from me. "You do not understand," he said, and his voice was thick with tears. "I have waited 4 years to find someone who would pass this test. 4 years. And in all that time, not one person has returned the necklace to me. Not one." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You have done this before?" "To every servant who enters this house," he said. "To every governess, every tutor, every maid. I leave the necklace where they can find it, and I wait. Some take it immediately. Some wait until they think they are no longer being watched. But they all take it in the end. They all prove themselves to be exactly what I expect." He turned back to face me, and his eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, his composure returning like armor being strapped into place. "Until you," he said. I did not know what to say. I stood there in my nightgown, the diamonds cold and heavy in my hands, and I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath my feet. "I am no saint," I said finally. I was tempted. For a moment, I imagined what I could do with such wealth. But I could not have lived with myself if I had taken it. I could not have looked at myself in the mirror, or looked at Rosalind, or faced my father's memory. "Your father," he repeated. "He was a good man," I said. "He lost everything, but he never lost his honor. I will not lose mine." The Duke looked at me for a long moment, and something in his expression changed. The coldness was still there, the wariness, the walls he had built to protect himself from a world that had hurt him too many times. But there was something else now, too, something that might have been respect. "Keep the necklace," he said. I stared at him. "I beg your pardon?" "It is a gift," he said, "for your honesty, for proving to me that there is still one person in this world who cannot be bought." "I cannot accept this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is worth a fortune, and you are worth more than a fortune, Miss Ashford," he said. "Take it, wear it, sell it if you wish. It is yours." He reached out and closed my fingers around the diamonds, and the touch of his hand against mine sent a shock through my entire body. It was only a moment, only the briefest contact, but I felt it everywhere, like lightning in my blood. "Go back to bed," he said quietly. "We will speak more in the morning." I went. I walked back through the dark corridors in a daze, the necklace clutched to my chest, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I did not understand what had just happened. I did not understand why he had given me such a gift, or what it meant, or what would come next. But I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that everything had changed. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in my narrow bed and watched the firelight dance on the ceiling and thought about the Duke. I thought about his tears, his walls, his loneliness. I thought about the wife who had betrayed him, and the daughter who needed him, and the household that feared him. I thought about the way his hand had felt against mine, warm and strong and trembling slightly. I thought, too, about myself, about the woman I had been before I came to this house, and the woman I was becoming. I had arrived at Blackwood Manor as a penniless orphan with nothing to offer but my labor. I had expected to remain invisible, unnoticed, a servant who performed her duties and asked for nothing more. But I was not invisible. The Duke had seen me. He had tested me, and I had passed, and now he looked at me with something in his eyes that I dared not name. When dawn finally came, gray and cold and heavy with the promise of snow, I rose and dressed with particular care. I wore my best dress, a simple gown of dark blue wool that my mother had made for me before she died. I brushed my hair until it shone and pinned it up in a style that was neat but not severe. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who was tired and uncertain, but also, somehow, hopeful. The necklace was still on my dressing table where I had left it. I did not know what to do with it. Wearing it seemed presumptuous, almost absurd. But leaving it there felt wrong too, as though I were rejecting the gift and the sentiment behind it. In the end, I wrapped it carefully in a handkerchief and placed it in the drawer of my writing desk. I would decide what to do with it later. Breakfast was a solitary affair, as usual. I ate in the nursery with Rosalind, who was delighted to have me to herself. She chattered about the snow that was beginning to fall outside the window, about the story we had read the night before, about the drawing she wanted to make that morning. I listened and smiled and tried to focus on her words, but my mind kept drifting to the West Wing, to the Duke, to the conversation that awaited us. The summons came at mid-morning. A footman appeared at the nursery door and informed me that His Grace wished to see me in the library at my earliest convenience. Rosalind looked up at me with wide eyes. "Papa wants to see you?" "It seems so," I said, keeping my voice light. "Will you be all right here with your drawing until I return?" She nodded, but there was worry in her expression. "Papa does not often ask to see the governesses. she said. Usually they only see him when they are being sent away. I knelt down and took her small hands in mine. I am not going anywhere, I said. I promise you. She searched my face, looking for the lie, just as she had done on the day we met. And just as she had done then, she found only truth. All right, she said softly. But come back soon. I will, I promised, and I meant it. The library was a vast room on the ground floor of the manor, its walls lined with books from floor to ceiling. Great windows overlooked the snow-covered gardens, and a fire roared in the massive stone fireplace. The Duke stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the falling snow, and he did not turn when I entered. Close the door, he said. I did as I was told, and waited. For a long moment, he was silent. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of snow against the window panes. Then he turned, and I saw that the walls were back in place, the coldness restored. Whatever vulnerability he had shown me the night before was gone now, locked away behind a mask of aristocratic composure. I owe you an apology, he said. I blinked, surprised. An apology? For what? For the test, he said. It was cruel. It was beneath me. I have treated you as I have treated everyone else who has entered this house, with suspicion and mistrust, and you did not deserve it. I considered his words carefully before responding. I understand why you felt the need to test me, I said. You have been hurt before. You were protecting yourself and your daughter. That does not make it right, he said. You came to this house in good faith, seeking only honest employment, and I treated you like a potential criminal. Perhaps, I said slowly, but I passed the test, and now you know that I can be trusted. Is that not worth something? He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. You are a remarkable woman, Miss Ashford. I am an ordinary woman, I said. I simply tried to do the right thing. He shook his head. There is nothing ordinary about you. In 4 years, you are the only person who has ever passed my test, the only person who has ever proven themselves worthy of my trust. Do you know what that means to me? I was afraid to answer, afraid to name the thing that hung unspoken in the air between us. I remained silent and waited for him to continue. He turned back to the window, and his voice when he spoke again was softer, almost reflective. When my wife left, he said, I swore I would never trust another woman again. I swore I would never allow myself to feel anything for anyone but my daughter. I built walls around my heart, Miss Ashford. I made myself cold and hard and impenetrable. And I told myself that it was necessary, that it was the only way to protect myself from being hurt again. He paused, and I saw his shoulders tense, saw him struggle with words that did not come easily. But last night, he said, when you stood at my door with that necklace in your hands, when you looked at me with those honest eyes and told me you were no thief, something happened. Something broke inside me. I do not know how to explain it. I only know that I have not wept in 4 years, and last night I wept like a child. I took a step toward him without thinking, drawn by the pain in his voice. Your Grace, I said softly. Sebastian, he said. My name is Sebastian. Sebastian, I repeated, and the name felt strange on my tongue, too intimate, too personal. You do not have to explain yourself to me. I am only a governess. He turned then, and his eyes met mine, and the coldness was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. You are not only anything, he said. You are everything. You are the first person in years who has treated me as a man rather than a title. You are the first person who has looked at me without fear. You are the first person who has proven to me that goodness still exists in this world. I did not know what to say. I stood there frozen as he crossed the distance between us. I am not a good man, he said. I am cold and distant and difficult. I have spent 4 years pushing everyone away, including my own daughter. I have forgotten how to feel, how to trust, how to love. But when I look at you, Miss Ashford, I feel things I thought I would never feel again. I should have stopped him. I should have reminded him of the distance that propriety demanded between an employer and his servant. I should have curtsied and excused myself and retreated to the safety of the nursery where Rosalind waited. But I did none of these things. "Eleanor," I said. "My name is Eleanor." "Eleanor," he repeated, and the way he said it made my name sound like a prayer. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if I can ever truly learn to trust again or to open my heart the way you deserve. But I know that I do not want you to leave. I know that when you are near, the darkness of this house feels a little less oppressive, and I know that I will regret it for the rest of my life if I do not tell you that you have changed something in me. I stood there looking up at him, and I felt the walls I had built around my own heart beginning to crack. I had come to Blackwood Manor expecting nothing but a paycheck and a place to sleep. I had not expected to love Rosalind. I had not expected to understand the Duke. And I certainly had not expected this impossible, improbable moment in which a man of wealth and power looked at me as though I were the most precious thing in the world. "I do not know what to say," I admitted. "Then do not say anything," he said. "Just stay." And I stayed. That simple word, stay, contained multitudes. It was a promise and a prayer and a leap of faith into darkness. I did not know what form my staying would take, whether as governess or companion or something more. I knew only that I could not leave, not now, not when the first cracks had appeared in the walls around Sebastian's heart. In the days that followed, I thought often about that moment in the library. I replayed our conversation in my mind as I lay in bed at night, as I taught Rosalind her lessons, as I walked alone through the snow-covered gardens. His words echoed in my memory like fragments of a half-remembered dream. "You are everything. The darkness feels less oppressive. I do not want you to leave." And beneath those words, the unspoken truth that trembled between us like a candle flame in a drafty room. Something had changed, irrevocably and permanently. We had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Yet nothing changed in the daily rhythm of my life. I still rose at dawn and dressed in my plain governess clothes. I still ate breakfast in the nursery with Rosalind. I still taught lessons and supervised needlework and read stories by the fire. To any observer, I was exactly what I had always been, a servant performing her duties with quiet competence. But I felt different. I felt seen. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw not my station or my circumstances, but the person beneath. Sebastian knew my heart, and he valued it, and that knowledge transformed everything. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the fabric of Blackwood Manor. The change was subtle at first, visible only to those who knew what to look for. The Duke began to take his meals with Rosalind and me, rather than alone in his study. He appeared in the nursery doorway sometimes, watching as I taught his daughter her lessons, and there was a softness in his eyes that had not been there before. He spoke to me, not as a servant, but as an equal, asking my opinions on books we had both read, on matters of household management, on Rosalind's education. And Rosalind, my dear, sweet Rosalind, bloomed like a flower in spring. She had always been a quiet child, but now she laughed freely, ran through the corridors with joyful abandon, threw herself into her father's arms when he entered a room. The transformation in her was miraculous, and I watched it with a heart so full of love that I sometimes feared it would burst. The servants noticed the change too. Mrs. Whitmore's perpetual frown softened into something that might almost have been a smile. Betsy, the kitchen maid, whispered to me one morning that she had heard His Grace humming as he walked through the garden, a thing that had not happened in years. Even Hawkins, the taciturn driver, seemed to stand a little straighter, as though the lightening of the household's mood had lifted a weight from his shoulders as well. But I knew that this fragile happiness could not last forever. The world beyond Blackwood Manor had not changed, and society had rules that could not be broken without consequence. The first sign of trouble came in early February, when a letter arrived bearing the crest of the Dowager Duchess of Blackwood. Sebastian's mother, I learned, had been living in Bath for the past several years, taking the waters for her health and holding court over the small society of that fashionable town. She had written to inform her son that she would be coming to visit, and that she expected to find the household in proper order when she arrived. Sebastian showed me the letter in the library, his jaw tight with tension. "My mother is a formidable woman," he said. "She has never approved of anything I have done, from my marriage to my method of raising Rosalind. She will have heard rumors about you, about the change in this house. She will come to investigate." I felt a chill despite the fire burning in the grate. "What kind of rumors?" He hesitated. "There are whispers in the village. Servants talk, and servants have relatives who talk, and eventually the talk reaches London and Bath and everywhere else. People are saying that the Duke of Blackwood has taken an interest in his daughter's governess. People are saying that I have allowed an inappropriate intimacy to develop within my household. Is it true?" I asked, though I knew the answer. He looked at me, and there was no coldness in his eyes now, only longing and frustration and something that might have been fear. "You know it is," he said quietly. "You know that what I feel for you is far beyond what is appropriate between an employer and a servant. But I have done nothing improper, Eleanor. I have never touched you except in the most innocent of ways. I have never compromised your reputation or your virtue." "I know," I said. "But society does not care about truth. Society only cares about appearances." He nodded grimly. "And my mother cares about society more than she cares about anything else. She will come here, and she will see the way I look at you, and she will demand that I send you away." "Will you?" I asked, and my voice was steady even though my heart was breaking. He crossed to me then and took my hands in his. "Never," he said fiercely. "I will never send you away. But we must be careful, Eleanor. We must be discreet. Until I can find a way to make this right, to find a path that allows us to be together without scandal, we must pretend that there is nothing between us but the relationship of employer and servant." I understood. I hated it, but I understood. The world was not kind to women who forgot their place, and it was even less kind to men who forgot theirs. If word got out that the Duke of Blackwood had fallen in love with his governess, the scandal would be devastating. His reputation, already tarnished by his wife's betrayal, would be ruined forever. Rosalind would be ostracized from the society she would one day need to navigate. And I, a penniless orphan with no family and no connections, would be branded as a fortune-hunting schemer who had seduced her way into a great house. "I will be careful," I promised. "I will give no one any reason to suspect." He raised my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, a gesture so tender that I felt tears prick at my eyes. "You are too good for me," he murmured. "Too good for this broken house and this broken man. And yet I cannot let you go. I am selfish, Eleanor. Selfish and unworthy and hopelessly in love with you." It was the first time he had spoken the word. Love. It hung in the air between us, heavy and precious and terrifying. "I am not too good for you," I said. "I am simply a woman who has found something worth fighting for." He smiled then, a real smile, the first I had ever seen from him. "And what is that?" "You," I said, "and Rosalind, and this life that I never expected but cannot imagine living without." He drew me into his arms and held me close, and I rested my head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. His arms wrapped around me like a shelter from a storm, and I breathed in the scent of him, sandalwood and leather and something essentially his own. In that moment, I felt safer than I had ever felt before. I felt as though nothing in the world could touch me as long as I remained in this embrace. We stood like that for a long moment, two broken people finding solace in each other's embrace, suspended in a bubble of stolen time. I could have stayed there forever, wrapped in his warmth, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against my cheek. But the world would not wait for us. The world never waits for lovers. The sound of footsteps in the corridor reminded us of the need for caution. We separated quickly, smoothly, as though we had been doing nothing more than discussing the household accounts. By the time Mrs. Whitmore knocked on the door, I was standing at a respectable distance, my hands folded demurely at my waist. "The Dowager Duchess's carriage has been spotted on the road," Mrs. Whitmore announced. "She will be here within the hour." Sebastian's expression hardened into its familiar mask of coldness. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. Please ensure that her rooms are prepared. And have Miss Ashford bring Rosalind to the drawing room at 4 o'clock. My mother will wish to see her granddaughter." Mrs. Whitmore curtsied and departed. I looked at Sebastian, and he looked at me, and we both understood that the battle was about to begin. The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood arrived in a whirlwind of fur and silk and disapproval. Her carriage was immense and black, drawn by 4 matched horses whose coats gleamed like polished ebony. Footmen in livery leaped down to open doors and arrange steps and hold parasols, though the day was gray and dreary with no sun to guard against. The entire production was designed to impress, and it did impress, though not in the way the Dowager might have wished. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with the same pale eyes as her son, but none of his hidden warmth. Her face was beautiful in the way that marble statues are beautiful, cold and perfect and utterly lifeless. She swept into the entrance hall as though she owned the place, which I supposed in some sense she did, and she looked around at the servants assembled to greet her with an expression that suggested she found them all wanting. "Sebastian," she said, offering her cheek for her son to kiss, "the house looks well enough, I suppose, though I notice you have still not replaced those dreadful curtains in the west drawing-room." "Mother," Sebastian replied, his voice flat and formal. "Welcome. I trust your journey was comfortable." "It was tolerable," the Dowager said, "though the roads in this part of the country are positively primitive. I do not understand why you insist on burying yourself in this God-forsaken corner of England when you could be living in London like a civilized person." "I prefer the country," Sebastian said, "as you well know." The Dowager sniffed and turned her attention to the rest of the household. Her gaze swept over Mrs. Whitmore, over the footmen, over the maids, and finally landed on me. I saw her eyes narrow, saw her take in my plain dress and my unfashionable hair and my position at the edge of the gathering, neither fully servant nor fully guest. "And who is this?" she demanded. "This is Miss Ashford," Sebastian said, "Rosalind's governess." "Ah," the Dowager said, and the single syllable was laden with meaning. "Yes, I have heard about Miss Ashford." I curtsied, keeping my eyes lowered. "Your Grace," I murmured. She did not acknowledge my greeting. Instead, she turned back to Sebastian and said, in a voice that carried clearly to every ear in the hall, "I understand that you have become quite attached to this governess. I understand that you dine with her, walk with her, spend hours closeted away with her in the library." Sebastian's expression did not change. "Miss Ashford has been an excellent addition to the household. Rosalind has flourished under her care." "Rosalind is a child," the Dowager said dismissively. "She does not know what is good for her. That is why she has adults to make decisions on her behalf. Adults who should know better than to encourage inappropriate attachments." I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, but I kept my head bowed and my mouth closed. This was not a battle I could fight. This was Sebastian's mother, and he must handle her in his own way. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private," Sebastian said quietly. The Dowager smiled, a thin, cold smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, I think the conversation can wait until tea. I am tired from my journey and wish to rest. Have my things sent to my room." She swept past us without another word, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and icy condescension in her wake. I remained where I was, staring at the floor, until the sound of her footsteps had faded and the servants had dispersed to their duties. Then I felt a hand on my elbow, gentle but firm, and I looked up to see Sebastian standing beside me. "Do not let her frighten you," he said softly. "She is all bark and no bite. I am not frightened. I lied. I am merely concerned for Rosalind. She should not be exposed to such hostility." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I will do what I can to protect both of you, but my mother is not easily managed. She will say what she wishes to say, and there is little I can do to stop her." "I know," I said. "But Sebastian, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that whatever happens, you will put Rosalind first. She is a child, and she has already suffered so much. If your mother demands that I leave, if the scandal becomes too great to bear, you must do what is best for your daughter. Not for me, not for yourself, but for her." He was silent for a long moment, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. Then he said, quietly but firmly, "I will not send you away. I refuse. There must be another path, and I will find it." I did not argue with him. I simply squeezed his hand once, quickly, and then went to fetch Rosalind for the meeting with her grandmother. The encounter in the drawing room was as dreadful as I had feared. The dowager sat in the grandest chair, arranged like a queen upon her throne, and looked down at her granddaughter with an expression of distaste. "The child is pale," she pronounced, "and too thin. What are you feeding her, Miss Ashford?" "Rosalind eats the same meals as the rest of the household," I said carefully. "The cook prepares nourishing food, and I ensure that she eats sufficient portions." The dowager sniffed. "She needs more fresh air, more exercise, less coddling. In my day, children were not treated like fragile porcelain dolls. They were expected to be strong and resilient. Rosalind is strong and resilient," I said, and there was an edge to my voice that I could not entirely suppress. "She has overcome a great deal in her young life." The dowager's eyes narrowed. "I do not recall asking for your opinion, Miss Ashford. You are a servant in this house, not a member of the family. I suggest you remember your place." I felt the blood drain from my face. Sebastian, who had been standing by the fireplace, took a step forward. "Miss Ashford is correct," he said. "Rosalind has shown remarkable strength and resilience, and that is due in no small part to the care she has received from her governess. I would thank you to treat Miss Ashford with the respect she deserves." The dowager turned her cold gaze on her son. "Respect," she repeated, "for a governess. Have you lost your mind entirely, Sebastian? Do you not see what is happening here? Do you not see that this woman has wrapped you around her finger, just as that French harlot once did?" The silence that followed was deafening. I saw Rosalind's eyes go wide with confusion and fear. I saw Sebastian's hands clench into fists at his sides, and I saw the dowager smile, satisfied that she had drawn blood. "Perhaps," the dowager continued, "you should spend less time in the library with Miss Ashford and more time considering your responsibilities. You are a duke, Sebastian. You have a duty to your name, your title, your family. You cannot throw that all away for the sake of some pretty face that happened to wander into your household." "I have thrown nothing away," Sebastian said, and his voice was ice. "I have found something, Mother, something I thought I had lost forever. And I will not let you or anyone else take it from me." "Found something," the dowager repeated mockingly. "Oh yes, I know exactly what you think you have found. A sweet, innocent young woman who loves you for yourself and not for your fortune. Is that it? Have you learned nothing from your first marriage?" "This is nothing like my first marriage," Sebastian said. "Eleanor is nothing like Catherine." "Eleanor," the dowager repeated, and her voice dripped with venom. "So it is Eleanor now. How charming. I could bear it no longer." Rosalind was trembling beside me, tears welling in her eyes, and I could not allow her to witness any more of this poisonous exchange. "If you will excuse us," I said, curtsying stiffly, "Lady Rosalind needs to rest before dinner." I did not wait for permission. I took Rosalind's hand and led her from the room, leaving Sebastian and his mother to continue their battle without us. In the safety of the nursery, I held Rosalind as she cried. She did not understand what was happening, only that the adults were angry and that it seemed to have something to do with me. I stroked her hair and murmured soothing words and wished, not for the first time, that I could protect her from all the cruelty of the world. "Miss Ashford," she said finally, her voice small and muffled against my shoulder. "Does grandmother want you to go away?" I hesitated, unwilling to lie to her. "I think she might," I said carefully. "But you promised you would stay." "I did promise, and I meant it." She pulled back and looked at me, her green eyes wet with tears. "Then you cannot go. You cannot leave me. Papa needs you. I need you. This is your home now." I felt my heart crack along fault lines I had not known existed. "Oh, my darling girl," I said, and my voice was thick with emotion. "I do not want to leave. I love you, and I love this house, and I love your father." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I saw Rosalind's eyes go wide. "You love Papa?" I nodded, beyond pretense now. "I do. But sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes the world is cruel and people must make sacrifices." "That is not fair," Rosalind said fiercely. "Why must you sacrifice? You have not done anything wrong." "No," I agreed. "But sometimes it does not matter what is right and what is wrong. Sometimes it only matters what people believe." She was silent for a long moment, processing this in the way that children do, with a combination of acceptance and rebellion. "I will not let them take you away," she said finally. "I will tell grandmother that if you go, I will go too. I will run away and live in the forest like a fairy princess, and then she will have no granddaughter at all." I could not help but smile at the fierce determination in her voice. "That is very brave of you," I said, "but I do not think it will be necessary. Your father will find a way. He is a clever man, and he loves us both." She nodded, slightly reassured. "Papa will fix it," she agreed. "Papa can fix anything." I wished I shared her confidence. But I knew the ways of the world better than she did, and I knew that some things could not be fixed no matter how much love was involved. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. I did not attend, of course. Governesses did not dine with dowager duchesses. I ate in the nursery as usual, but I could not taste the food. My stomach churned with anxiety, and I found myself straining to hear sounds from the dining room below, hoping for some indication of how the evening was progressing. Later, after I had put Rosalind to bed, Sebastian came to find me in my room. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual, his shoulders bowed as though carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "How bad is it?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. He crossed to the window and looked out at the darkness beyond, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "She has given me an ultimatum," he said finally. "Either I dismiss you and find a suitable wife within the year, or she will cut off my access to the family trust." I felt the blood drain from my face. The family trust. I knew what that meant. The Blackwood fortune was old and entailed, managed by a board of trustees of whom the dowager was the most influential. Without the trust, Sebastian would have only the income from his estates, barely enough to maintain the house and pay the servants. He would be a duke in name only, with no fortune to support the title. "She cannot be serious," I whispered. "She is entirely serious," Sebastian said grimly. "She believes that by threatening me financially, she can force me to comply. She does not understand that I would give up every penny to keep you here." "But you cannot," I said. "Think of Rosalind. Think of the household. All these people depend on you. They would lose their positions, their livelihoods." "I know," he said, "and that is why I must find another way." "What other way is there?" He turned from the window and looked at me, and there was a fire in his eyes that I had never seen before. "I could marry you," he said. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and inevitable all at once. "You cannot be serious," I said. "I am entirely serious. If you were my wife, there would be nothing improper about our relationship. The scandal would blow over. My mother would have no grounds on which to challenge me. But the scandal would not blow over, I protested. It would explode. A duke marrying his governess? The newspapers would have a field day. Society would never accept it. I do not care about society, Sebastian said. I do not care about newspapers. I only care about you and Rosalind and this life we are building together. I shook my head, though my heart was pounding with a hope I dared not acknowledge. You are not thinking clearly. The grief of your first marriage, the loneliness of these past years, they have clouded your judgment. You barely know me. I know enough, he said firmly. I know that you are honest and brave and kind. I know that you love my daughter as though she were your own. I know that when I am with you, I feel like myself for the first time in years. What more do I need to know? Everything, I said. You need to know my past, my family, my flaws. You need to know that I snore sometimes, and that I cannot cook to save my life, and that I have a terrible temper when I am tired. He smiled at that, a genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his face. I already suspected as much, and I do not care. I want you, Eleanor. All of you. The snoring and the temper and the terrible cooking. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Sebastian, I said, and my voice broke on his name. Do not answer now, he said quickly. Take time, think about it. Consider all the consequences. I will not rush you into a decision that will shape the rest of your life. But know this, Eleanor. If you say yes, I will spend every day proving to you that you made the right choice. And with that, he left. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about everything he had said. Marriage. To a duke. It was the stuff of fairy tales, the kind of stories I used to read to Rosalind about servant girls who caught the eye of princes and lived happily ever after. But fairy tales never talked about the realities of such matches. They never mentioned the whispers and the sneers, the closed doors and the cut direct. They never mentioned the loneliness of being forever an outsider, accepted in name, but never truly belonging. I thought of my father, who had believed in love above all else, who had married my mother despite her lack of fortune, because she made him happy. I thought of my mother, who had never complained about their modest circumstances, who had found joy in simple pleasures, and a husband who adored her. They had been happy together, truly happy, and that happiness had lasted until death parted them. Could I find the same happiness with Sebastian? Could I brave the storms that would surely come and build a life with him despite everything that stood against us? I thought of Rosalind, who already called me by my Christian name when we were alone, who had told me just that evening that she wished I were her mother. I thought of the way she laughed now, freely and often, so different from the silent, watchful child I had first met. I thought of what it would mean to be her stepmother, to have the right to love her openly and completely. And I thought of Sebastian himself, his rare smiles, his dry wit, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about books or horses or his plans for improving the estate, the way he held me in his arms as though I were something infinitely precious, the way he had wept that first night when he discovered that one person in the world could be trusted. By the time dawn broke, I had made my decision. I found him in the library, standing by the window as he so often did, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered gardens. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and I saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "Eleanor," he said, "I did not expect you so early." I could not sleep, I admitted. I have been thinking all night. And? I crossed the room until I stood before him, close enough to touch, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "I have a question," I said. "Ask." "If I say yes, will you regret it? Will you wake up one day and realize that you have ruined yourself for a woman who is not worth the sacrifice?" He reached out and took my hands in his, and his grip was warm and strong. "I could never regret you," he said. "You are worth any sacrifice, any scandal, any price the world demands. Even if your mother disowns you? Especially then. She has never loved me, Eleanor. Not really. She loved the idea of me, the Duke who would restore the family's reputation and produce heirs to carry on the name. But the man I actually am? She has never bothered to know him. I understand that kind of loneliness, I said softly. I was alone too, before I came here. I had no one who truly knew me, no one who cared whether I was happy or sad, alive or dead. And then I found Rosalind, and then I found you. So you will stay? I will stay, I said. Not just as governess, or companion, or even as wife. I will stay as partner, as family, as yours. He pulled me into his arms then, and he kissed me for the first time. There in the library, with the morning sun streaming through the windows and the world holding its breath around us. It was a gentle kiss, reverent and tender, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through darkness. When we finally separated, he rested his forehead against mine and said, "I do not deserve you." "Perhaps not," I agreed, and I smiled at him, "but you have me nonetheless." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and confrontation. The Dowager, upon learning of our engagement, unleashed a fury that shook the very walls of Blackwood Manor. She raged and threatened and cajoled. She sent letters to every influential person she knew, warning them of the scandal that was brewing. She even attempted to have me arrested for some invented theft, a plot that was quickly foiled when Sebastian produced the necklace I had returned and demanded to know how a thief could have come to possess something she had supposedly stolen. But for all her efforts, the Dowager could not stop us. The servants, to my surprise and gratitude, rallied to our side. Mrs. Whitmore, who had never been openly warm to me, now treated me with a fierce protectiveness that bordered on maternal. Betsy organized a collection among the staff to purchase fabric for my wedding dress. Even the villagers, who had every reason to resent an outsider rising above her station, seemed more curious than hostile. And Rosalind, my dear, beloved Rosalind, was delirious with joy. "I am to have a real mother," she said when we told her, her eyes shining with tears. "A mother who will stay." "I will stay forever," I promised. And for the first time, I was certain it was a promise I could keep. The wedding took place on a crisp March morning, in the small chapel on the grounds of Blackwood Manor. The air was cold but clear, and a pale winter sun broke through the clouds as we gathered, as though heaven itself wished to witness our union. The chapel had been decorated with whatever flowers could be coaxed into bloom at that early season, snowdrops and crocuses and early violets, their delicate fragrance mingling with the scent of candle wax and ancient stone. The Dowager did not attend, having departed for Bath in a storm of recriminations and dire predictions. Her absence was noted by all but mourned by none. Instead, the chapel was filled with the people who truly mattered, the servants who had become my friends, the villagers who had welcomed me despite my strange rise in station, the solicitor and the vicar, and the handful of neighbors who cared more about happiness than about scandal. But every servant was there, crowded into the pews, their faces bright with joy. Mrs. Whitmore wept openly, abandoning her usual reserve to embrace me before the ceremony. Betsy had adorned my hair with ribbons she had saved for months to buy. Even Hawkins was there, standing stiffly in the back row, but I saw him dash a tear from his eye when he thought no one was looking. And Rosalind stood beside me as my maid of honor, clutching a bouquet of winter roses, her face radiant with happiness. She had helped me dress that morning, chattering all the while about how she would have a real mother at last, how we would be a proper family, how everything was going to be perfect from now on. Sebastian waited for me at the altar, dressed in his finest, and when I walked toward him, his eyes never left my face. He looked at me as though I were the only person in the world, and I felt my heart swell with a love so vast that it seemed impossible that my small body could contain it. The vicar pronounced us man and wife, and Sebastian kissed me, and the chapel erupted in cheers. I was no longer Eleanor Ashford, penniless orphan, governess, servant. I was Eleanor Vance, Duchess of Blackwood, wife of the man I loved, mother to the child I adored. It was, I thought, the happily ever after I had never dared to dream of. But fate, it seemed, had one more test in store for us. Spring arrived early that year, painting the moors with purple heather and golden gorse. Rosalind and I spent our days exploring the gardens, picking wildflowers, chasing butterflies through meadows that seemed to stretch forever. Sebastian joined us when his duties permitted, and we would walk together through the grounds, Rosalind skipping ahead, the two of us following hand in hand. I had never been so happy. Every morning I woke beside my husband, marveling at the improbability of my fortune. Every evening I tucked Rosalind into bed, reading her stories and kissing her forehead and telling her that I loved her. Every moment was a gift I had not earned, but was determined to cherish. And then Catherine came back. I learned of her arrival the way I learned of most things in the household, through the whispers of the servants. A woman had come to the gate, they said, a woman in traveling clothes, thin and worn, with dark circles under her eyes and desperation in her voice. She had demanded to see the Duke. She had claimed to be his wife. The news spread through the household like wildfire, whispered from maid to footman, to cook to groom. By the time it reached me, it had acquired the weight of calamity. I heard it from Betsy, who had tears in her eyes as she delivered the message, and I felt my world shatter around me like glass. Catherine, the woman who had abandoned her husband and child, the woman who had stolen the family jewels and run away with a lover, the woman who was supposed to be dead. I was in the nursery with Rosalind when the news reached me, and I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Sebastian had told me that Catherine was believed to be dead, that she had disappeared on the continent and never been heard from again. But here she was, alive and present, claiming a title that was now mine. "Stay here," I told Rosalind, keeping my voice steady with an effort. "I need to speak with your father." "Is something wrong?" she asked, her eyes wide. "I do not know yet," I admitted. "But whatever it is, we will face it together. That is what families do." I found Sebastian in his study, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as though he might fall without its support. Across from him sat a woman I had never seen before but recognized immediately. Catherine Blackwood, née Catherine Ashby, had once been beautiful. I could see traces of that beauty still in the fine bones of her face, in the arch of her brows, in the shape of her mouth. But beauty had faded under the assault of hard living and harder choices. Her skin was sallow, her hair lank, her clothes cheaply made and travel-stained. She looked at me as I entered, and there was a flicker of something in her eyes, envy or hatred or perhaps simply exhaustion. "So," she said, and her voice was hoarse, "this is the woman who has replaced me." Sebastian turned to me, and I saw fear in his eyes, fear and guilt, and something that might have been shame. "Eleanor," he said, "I am sorry. I did not know how to tell you." "Tell me what?" Catherine leaned forward, and there was a smile on her lips, thin and bitter. "Tell you that he is still married to me," she said, "that your wedding was a sham, that you are nothing but his mistress." I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. "No," I said, "that is impossible. You abandoned him. You left." "The marriage was dissolved. I never signed any papers," Catherine said. "I never agreed to any divorce. I simply left. And the law, my dear, is quite clear on the matter. Until death do us part." I looked at Sebastian, desperate for him to deny it. "Tell me she is lying," I said. He closed his eyes. "She is not lying," he said. "I believed her dead. I was told she had died in Paris, but I never obtained proof. I never saw a body." "Because there was no body," Catherine said. "I was not dead. I was merely hidden, surviving as best I could after that French count abandoned me." but I am tired of surviving, and I am tired of hiding, and I have come back to claim what is mine." "What do you want?" I asked, and my voice was steady despite the terror that gripped my heart. Catherine's smile widened. "What any abandoned wife wants," she said. "Compensation. Sebastian has money and I have none. Sebastian has a grand house and a title and everything a person could desire, and I have been living in a hovel, eating scraps, wondering if I would survive another winter." "So you want money," Sebastian said flatly. "I want what is owed to me," Catherine replied. "I gave you years of my life and a daughter besides. I deserve something for that." "You gave me nothing," Sebastian said, and there was ice in his voice. "You took everything you could get your hands on, and then you left. You abandoned your child without a second thought. I left because you made it impossible for me to stay. You were cold and distant and utterly indifferent to my needs. You cared more about your dusty books than you ever cared about me. And so you took a lover. You humiliated me before all of society. You stole my family's diamonds and fled with a man who promised you everything and gave you nothing." Catherine's eyes flashed. I did what I had to do to survive, and I would do it again. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I stood rooted to the spot, watching the two of them face each other like combatants across a battlefield, and I felt as though I had wandered into a nightmare from which there was no waking. Finally, Sebastian spoke again. "What is your price?" Catherine named a figure. It was exorbitant, enough to support her in comfort for the rest of her life. I saw Sebastian's jaw tighten, but he did not refuse. "And in exchange?" he asked. "In exchange," Catherine said, "I will disappear. I will sign whatever papers you put in front of me. I will never contact you or Rosalind again. You can have your annulment or divorce or whatever legal fiction you prefer, and you can marry your little governess properly, and no one will ever need to know the difference." I felt sick. This was not justice. This was extortion. Catherine was using the law as a weapon, threatening to destroy everything Sebastian and I had built unless we paid her off. But what choice did we have? Sebastian looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. I nodded just once, though my heart was breaking. "Very well," he said to Catherine. "I will have my solicitor draw up the papers. You will have your money, and then you will leave, and I never want to see your face again." Catherine rose from her chair, that bitter smile still playing on her lips. "It has been a pleasure," she said. "I do hope your second marriage is happier than your first, although I must say you have chosen a rather peculiar bride, a governess. Really, Sebastian, I expected better of you." "Get out," Sebastian said quietly. She went, sweeping past me with a rustle of cheap fabric and a waft of stale perfume. I did not move until I heard the front door close behind her, and then my legs gave way, and I sank into the nearest chair. Sebastian was beside me in an instant, kneeling on the floor, taking my hands in his. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. I never meant for you to learn of it this way. I thought she was dead. I truly believed she was gone forever." "It does not matter," I said, though the words felt hollow. "What matters is that we are not truly married. That everything we thought we had is a lie." "It is not a lie," he said fiercely. "Our love is not a lie. The vows we made, the promises we shared, they were real. A piece of paper does not change that. Society will not see it that way." "Damn society," he said, and there was fire in his eyes. "I do not care what society thinks. I care about you. I care about Rosalind. I care about the life we are building together, and I will not let Catherine destroy that, no matter what she threatens." I looked at him, at this man who had suffered so much and still found the strength to hope, and I felt my own strength returning. "What do we do?" I asked. "We pay her," he said grimly. "We give her what she wants, and we obtain the legal dissolution of my first marriage, and then we marry again, properly, in the eyes of the law. It will take time and money and a great deal of unpleasantness, but in the end, we will be free." And Rosalind? Rosalind will be told as little as possible. She is too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships. All she needs to know is that her mother has visited and gone away again, and that nothing has changed in our family. But things have changed, I whispered. I am not your wife. I have no right to call myself Duchess, no right to live in this house, no right to mother your daughter. Sebastian cupped my face in his hands and looked into my eyes with an intensity that took my breath away. You have every right, he said, more right than Catherine ever had. She may have borne Rosalind, but she was never a mother to her. You have been more of a mother in these past months than Catherine was in 7 years. Rosalind loves you. I love you. This is your home, now and always. No piece of paper can change that. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. And I clung to that belief in the difficult weeks that followed. The legal proceedings were complicated and expensive. Sebastian's solicitor, a gray-haired man named Mr. Pembroke, worked tirelessly to navigate the labyrinth of ecclesiastical law that governed such matters. There were meetings and depositions, affidavits and testimonies. Catherine's abandonment had to be proved, her adultery documented, her agreement to the dissolution witnessed and notarized. Through it all, I waited. I continued to teach Rosalind, to manage the household as I had done before, to sleep in the bed I shared with Sebastian, even though the law said I had no right to be there. The servants knew something was wrong, but they asked no questions, and I offered no explanations. And then, finally, it was over. Mr. Pembroke arrived at Blackwood Manor on a sunny afternoon in May, his face wreathed in smiles. The dissolution had been granted, he announced. The church had reviewed the evidence and agreed that the marriage between Sebastian Vance and Catherine Ashby had been irreparably broken. Sebastian was a free man. We were married again the following week, this time in the village church, with half the county in attendance. I wore a gown of ivory silk, and Rosalind carried my train, and when the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, the congregation erupted in cheers. And this time, it was real. This time, there was no shadow of an absent wife hovering over us, no threat of legal challenge, no doubt that I belonged where I stood. I was, finally and completely, the Duchess of Blackwood. The years that followed were the happiest of my life. Rosalind grew from a sad, withdrawn child into a confident young woman, quick-witted and warm-hearted, a credit to her father and, if I may say so, to me. She called me Mama, and I called her my daughter, and the bond between us was as strong as any blood tie. Sebastian and I welcomed 2 more children into our family, a son we named Thomas after my father, and a daughter we named Rose in honor of her sister. Blackwood Manor, once a house of shadows and sorrow, became a home filled with laughter and love. The dowager never fully forgave us, but she did eventually relent. She visited once a year, always in the autumn, and though she never spoke a word of apology, I saw the way her eyes softened when she looked at her grandchildren. She died peacefully in her sleep when Thomas was 5, and we buried her in the family plot with all the honors due a woman of her station. Of Catherine, we heard nothing for many years. She had taken her money and disappeared into the vast anonymity of London, and we did not seek her out. But on Rosalind's wedding day, a letter arrived, addressed in a hand I did not recognize. It was from Catherine. She was dying, she wrote, and she wanted Rosalind to know that she was sorry. Sorry for leaving, sorry for being a poor mother, sorry for all the pain she had caused. She did not ask for forgiveness, only for understanding. Rosalind read the letter in silence, her face unreadable. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the fire. I have a mother, she said quietly, and it is not her. I took her in my arms and held her. This child who had become a woman, this stranger who had become my daughter, and I felt my heart overflow with gratitude for the strange and winding path that had brought us together. That night, after the wedding celebrations had ended and the guests had gone, Sebastian and I walked alone through the gardens of Blackwood Manor. The moon was full, silvering the hedges and the fountain, and the path where we had walked so many times before. "Do you remember," he asked, "the night you returned the necklace to me?" I smiled. How could I forget? "You wept." "I did," he admitted. "I wept because you gave me hope. Hope that I might yet find someone worthy of trust. Hope that I might yet build a life worth living." "And have you?" I asked. "Built a life worth living?" He stopped walking and turned to face me, his hands finding mine in the darkness. "More than worth living," he said. "Thanks to you, I have found joy where I expected only sorrow. I have found love where I expected only betrayal. I have found a family where I expected only solitude." He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done so many years ago. In a library full of books and firelight. "You were my test," he said, "and you were my redemption." I laid a trap, expecting to catch a thief, and instead I caught something far more precious. "And what is that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A partner," he said. "A wife. A love that will last until my dying breath." I leaned into him, resting my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The night was cold, but his arms were warm, and I felt no chill. I thought of the girl I had been when I first came to this house, frightened and lonely, with nothing but a worn dress and a broken heart. I thought of the woman I had become, confident and loved, surrounded by family and friends who cherished me. I thought of all the trials we had faced, all the storms we had weathered, all the moments of doubt and despair and triumph, and I knew with a certainty that went beyond words that every step of the journey had been worth it. The necklace, the one that had started it all, still sat in its velvet box in my dressing room. I had never sold it, never worn it, never done anything with it but keep it safe. It was a reminder of the night my life had changed, the night I had proven myself worthy of trust, the night I had first begun to love the man who was now my husband. Perhaps, I thought, I would wear it to Rose's christening, or to Thomas's first day at school, or perhaps I would simply keep it, a treasure beyond price, a symbol of all that we had overcome. For it was not the diamonds that made the necklace valuable. It was the story behind them. It was the test of character and the triumph of love. It was the proof that goodness still existed in a world often cruel, that trust could be rebuilt after betrayal, that two broken people could find wholeness in each other's arms. Sebastian watched from the shadows that night, and what he saw made him weep. But they were tears of hope, not sorrow, and hope, as I had learned, was the beginning of everything. I am an old woman now, writing these words by candlelight in the same library where Sebastian first kissed me. He has been gone these 5 years, taken by a fever that no physician could cure, and I miss him every day, but I am not alone. Rosalind visits often, bringing her own children to run through the corridors of Blackwood Manor. Thomas has taken over the management of the estate, and he does so with a wisdom and kindness that would have made his grandfather proud. Rose lives in London with her husband, but she writes to me every week without fail. The house is quieter now than it once was, but the silence is not the heavy, oppressive silence of my early days here. It is the peaceful silence of a life well lived, of love given and received, of a legacy that will endure long after I am gone. I think sometimes of the girl I was, standing in that dark corridor with diamonds in my hands, not knowing that the next step I took would determine the rest of my life. I think of how easily I might have failed the test, how easily I might have taken the necklace and run, how easily I might have become just another name in Sebastian's long list of disappointments. What if I had yielded to temptation? What if I had let fear or greed or desperation guide my hand? I would have walked out of Blackwood Manor with a fortune in diamonds and nothing else. No love, no family, no purpose. I would have been rich in gold and poor in everything that matters. And Sebastian would have remained alone, convinced once more that the world held nothing but betrayal. But I did not fail. I did not run. I stayed, and I loved, and I built something beautiful out of the ashes of 2 broken lives. That is my legacy. Not the title, not the fortune, not the grand house with its portraits and its silver and its storied history. My legacy is love. My legacy is the family I helped to create, the children I raised, the man I cherished until his dying breath. And when my time comes, when I close my eyes for the last time and go to join Sebastian in whatever comes after, I will go with no regrets. I was tested, and I proved myself true. I was loved, and I loved in return, and that, in the end, is all that matters.